succession to the throne. Whereas before there was no absolute succession to the throne, ever since 1066, when William the Conqueror took the country of England. 9. And whereas it hath been found by experience that it is inconsistent with the safety and welfare of this Protestant kingdom to be governed by a popish prince or by any king or queen marrying a papist, the said Lord's spiritual and temporal and commons do further pray that it may be enacted that all and every person and persons, that is, are or shall be reconciled to or shall have communion with the see or church of Rome, or shall profess the popish religion, or shall marry a papist, shall be excluded and be forever incapable to inherit, possess, or enjoy the crown and government of this realm in Ireland, and the dominions thereunto belonging, or any part of the same, or to have, use, or exercise any regal power, authority, or jurisdiction within the same. And in all and every such case or cases, the people of these realms shall be and are hereby absolved of their allegiance. And the said crown and government shall from time to time descend to and be enjoyed by such person or persons, being Protestants, as should have inherited and enjoyed the same, in case the said person or persons so reconciled, holding communion or professing or marrying, as aforesaid, were naturally dead. Were naturally dead. They really did not want the Pope in their business. This was one of the questions when Queen Mary died, whether Charles could be king, because there was question over whether Camilla was in fact Protestant or Catholic. And for Charles to marry a Catholic woman would keep him from being eligible to the crown under this provision. So it's still in effect today in England and still fully part of the law. 10. And that every king and queen of this realm, who at any time hereafter shall come to succeed in the imperial crown of this kingdom, shall, on the first day of the meeting of the first parliament, next after his or her coming to the crown, sitting in his or her throne in the House of Peers, in the presence of the Lords and Commons therein assembled, or at his or her coronation, before such person or persons, who shall administer the coronation oath to him or her at the time of his or her taking the said oath, which shall first happen, may subscribe and audibly repeat the declaration mentioned in the statute made in the 13th year of the reign of King Charles II, in Tould, an act for the more effectual preserving the king's person and government by disabling papists from sitting in either House of Parliament, but if it shall happen that such king or queen upon his or her succession to the crown of this realm shall be under the age of 12 years, then every such king or queen shall make, subscribe, and audibly repeat the said declaration at his or her coronation, or the first day of the meeting of the Parliament, as aforesaid, which shall first happen after such king or queen shall have attained the said age of 12 years. So you could be king at 12. I guess viewing what we have in the White House could be a good thing. Just saying, just making an observation. 11. All which their majesties are contented and pleased shall be declared, enacted, and established by authority of this present Parliament, and shall stand, remain, and be the law of this realm forever. And the same are by their said majesties, by and with the advice and consent of the Lords. Where have we heard that before? Advice and consent of the Lords. Don't we have a bicameral Congress? Right? We have the House of Representatives and the Senate, and it's the Senate, the President can set justices by advice and consent of the Senate. Where do you think our founding fathers got it from? Right here. By and with the advice and consent of the Lord, spiritual and temporal, and commons, and parliament assembled, and by the authority of the same declared, enacted, and established accordingly. 12. And be it further declared and enacted by the authority aforesaid, that from and after this present session of Parliament, no dispensation by non-obstinate or to any statute or any part thereof shall be allowed, but that the same shall be held void and of no effect, except a dispensation be allowed of in such statute, and except in such cases as shall be specifically provided for by one or more bill or bills to be passed during this present session of Parliament. 13. Provided that no charter or grant or pardon granted before the 23rd day of October in the year of our Lord 1689 shall be any ways impeached or invalidated by this act, but that the same shall be and remain of the same force and effect in law, and no other than as if this act had never been made. That is the British Bill of Rights. Now, one thing that should be painfully obvious to everyone is that our founding fathers, when they wrote the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, plagiarized the heck out of it. Right? This is one of the misgivings that we have in school. Everybody thinks that our founding fathers in 1776 come up with this great idea that we're going to be that we're going to come up with a constitution and be a republic. And they dreamed this thing all up on their own. They didn't. This was 700 years in the making. Over 700 years in the making. They studied their history. They knew their history. They weren't distracted by TV and the internet and soccer games and the Super Bowl and all that. These are people that actually worked all day long and then read by candlelight at night. Could we expect the same today for intelligence? We think we're so smart today because we've got public schools that we were never intended to have, and we've got universities that are so indoctrinated, and we're turning out all these people that we're giving them all these post-nominal degrees. Everybody knows what a BS degree is, right? Yeah. Then you go a couple longer years and you get your MS degree. That's more of the same. And then when you're really good and you get 8 years in, they'll give you a PhD, which is piled higher and deeper. And that's exactly what we have today. And we think that the people back then were not smart. Well, there's a big difference between education and wisdom. We're extremely educated and extremely stupid when it comes to wisdom. Our founders were specifically educated in history and were extremely wise with what they gave us. This is why Benjamin Franklin, when he left Independence Hall after they had set in session to debate this new Constitution, he walked out and a woman walked up to him and she said, "So, Dr. Franklin, what have you given us?" And he said, "Madam, you have a republic if you can keep it." Now, in that, of all the delegates at the Constitutional Convention, all of them were in their 30s and 40s. Franklin was the only one that was in his 80s. He was 81 years old. He was the oldest of all of them. I've come to find out that just persevering on this earth long enough gives you wisdom. And we need to start listening to that wisdom of the old instead of thinking that because I've got all this knowledge and a PhD behind me, that somehow I'm smarter than somebody that's 80. Not true. The guy that's 80's got far more wisdom than the guy with a PhD and 25 years old. far more. We need to start listening to that more. Had our founders listened a little bit more to Franklin, a lot of the problems that we have today would have been alleviated. They would have been subverted. Franklin had some very good ideas. Now, I like Franklin, but a lot of my Christian friends don't like Franklin because in history he's been deemed a deist, because they think that he I'm losing my podium here. They think that he was somehow anti-Christian. Was he a partier? Yep. Was he a womanizer? Yep. There's all those things. But if you're going to church to try to find saints, you're in the wrong place. People that are in the church should understand that they're sinners, and that's why they're there, right? But there was one statement that Franklin made that they have deemed him a deist for. And that is, he said, "I don't know if I believe in the divinity of Christ, but I see no disadvantage to believing it." So what he was saying, he was a very logical man. If Christ wasn't God incarnate on earth, and you follow those principles, and you die, there was no harm anyway. But if he was God incarnate on earth, and you deny those principles, you got an eternity of regret. Pretty wise words if you think about it just scientifically, right? So a lot of people call him a deist for that comment, but he definitely was not a deist. He was the one that demanded that before every session of Congress that there should be a prayer. He was he was a big advocate for that, in asking the providence of Almighty God upon the body that creates law. So he definitely wasn't a deist. But as we go through this, I want you to understand this history. This history is important. Our Declaration of Independence, Jefferson sat and wrote it. They actually wanted Franklin to write it. Franklin, he said he got Jefferson to do it because he didn't like people critiquing his writing. And so he knew that if he could get Jefferson to do it, his feelings wouldn't be hurt in the end. Because 20% of what Jefferson wrote was slashed and cut and changed. And Jefferson even wrote a letter where his feelings were a little hurt that they changed so much of what he spent time writing. And Franklin was smart enough not to put himself in that situation. Again, another wise move. But he was still there for advice and consent with Jefferson. So you have to understand how important this history is. You have to understand this is the history that we don't get in school. This is the history that you need to start teaching your children and your grandchildren, because history will always repeat itself. And we're starting to see it today. It was Patrick Henry that said, "I have but one lamp to guide my steps, and that's the lamp of experience. I know no way to judge the future but by the past." So the past is extremely important because it's going to depend on the future of your children. The past is extremely important. And so make sure that before they get distracted by too many things, that they have a good lamp to guide their footsteps. Are there any questions to tonight's class? Any comments? I'm not so much like Franklin and Jefferson. I worked in a prison for 8 years and I was in the military for 12 years, so criticism doesn't hurt me at all because I don't have any feelings left. Oh, might I add, I raised 3 daughters too, so all of my feelings are gone. So
that's nothing.
You can't hurt me. Yeah, he knows. A guy that's raised daughters, you can't hurt his feelings.
I think for the new people, it'd be good for you to explain about the dictionary of the year, like
Yes.
the militia.
That's one of the things. Words have meanings, and in your packet you're going to have, there's a set of self-evident truths, and there's also a paper in there on definitions, because words have meanings. Now, the Constitution is an ancient word for the word contract. That's what it means. Contract has to have two or more parties to the contract, right? No, if there's only one party, there's not a contract. You can make your own decision. But if there has to be at least two or more parties to a contract. Those are the parties to the contract. A contract has to produce something, right? Why have a contract that doesn't produce anything? We've got that in Congress. So a contract has to produce something. Well, contract law, all the way back to 1215, says that anytime there's a dispute in the contract, we have to go back to the original meaning of the provisions of the contract. Does that make sense? Doesn't matter how old the contract is, what the original meaning, what the original intent of that contract, of the provisions of that contract were, is what we have to go back to. Now, everybody knows that the legislature does what? They make the law, right? And then the executive does what? They enforce the law, right? And then the judicial does what? Interprets the law, is what we're always told in school, right? Show me in Article 6, Section 1, Clause 3 that the Chief Justices take of the Supreme Court that says they take an oath to interpret the law. Is it there? Nope, doesn't exist. They take an oath to support, uphold, and defend the law, the Constitution. So Scalise, or not Scalise, Antonium's, that name didn't sound right, not Scalise. Maybe it is Scalise, yeah. I liked him. He did a lot of good things. One of the things that when things were brought before him in the Supreme Court is he would go back and he would read something very important, and that was the Federalist Papers. Because the Federalist Papers are an accurate depiction of what the founders, of what the people who wrote the contract, what those provisions were there for. The original intent of each of those provisions. And quite a few times, he would bring out those things from the different Federalist Papers, and he would put that into his opinions. He did a lot of good things. He did some bad things too, but that's one of the self-evident truths we have to realize. Every human being since the garden has the ability of good and evil in them. So we can do good things and we can do bad things. We can even do bad things thinking we're doing good things. And this is part of the problem. This is why there's wisdom in the counsel of many. God's word is true, and it's very wise. So even good people can do bad things without the intent of doing bad things. So if we understand that the words have meanings, the Constitution's an ancient word for the word contract. Who's the contract between? Anybody tell me? A lot of times people tell me, well, it's between a state and federal government. Not true. It was the people of the several states, because the Constitution itself created 3 branches of government. That was what the contract created. So I'm still waiting for some scholar to explain to me how 1/3 of the product of the contract, known as the Supreme Court, gets to decide the provisions of the contract, whether it is or isn't constitutional. Nobody's been able to explain that to me. But yet I get all the time, well, the Supreme Court said. I don't care. What do the people say? Because it's the great body of the people, which is the power, which is the government, that decides what is and isn't constitutional. It's us. It's we the people. It's not 1/3 of the product of a contract. It's we the people. We are the top. That's why the Constitution starts out, "We the people." In Federalist 39 and in 24, I believe it is, you're going to find out Madison says that the federal government can't exist without state governments. Wholly impossible. If that's the case, state government can't exist without county government. Wholly impossible. County government can't survive without townships, township government, and city and village government, correct? And if we've got a tract of land that's just big enough for a township or a county, but there's no people there, then you can't have a township or a county, can you? So, we the people. So this idea that somehow the federal government is the top and we the people are the bottom is a fictitious anomaly of the 20th century through our public schools to teach you that somehow you're under the federal government and all these governments and they're the top, when in fact you are the government and they serve you. Without the people, none of it could exist. It's we the people. So, understanding that when we look at words such as Constitution, there's a few little things that have happened in the 20th century that are anomalies in which we have changed words to fit our definition of the day. Such as one of them was regulate. In the 1920s, government came together, our Congress came together and decided that because Congress has the ability to regulate trade among the several states, that meant that they could regulate guns and become the only authority on guns in America, and everybody in every sovereign state had to sign a contract with the federal government for guns. The problem is the word regulate at the time of the Constitution meant the same thing as facilitate. So Congress has the duty to facilitate trade among the several states, not to take it over and decide who gets to do what in the several states. Because each state is sovereign, and the local authority has no more authority in the federal sphere, no more than the federal has any authority within the state sphere, within the local sphere. This is why your sheriff is top dog. That's why your sheriff can throw the president out of his county if he so wishes. The sheriff's job is to be that firewall between an overreaching local, state, and federal government and the rights of the people. He is the protector of the shire. He is the shire reeve, which is where we get the word sheriff. So, that's an important thing to remember. Any other questions? If there are none, next week we will be, what's on next week's syllabus? I don't have my syllabus in front of me.
History leading up to the Civil War.
Oh, the history. That's a long one. That's a long one next week. That's 55. Let's see, I'll pull it up here. That's 55. See, this one, if we look at this one tonight, which is a fairly quick one, it only has 27 slides. So next week, if we pull next week's up, take a look. It's 55 slides. Okay? So we'll go through it pretty quick, but this is basically what it's going to cover. It's going to cover the French and Indian War of 1754 to 1763, the Royal Proclamation Line of 1763, Pontiac's Rebellion of 1763, the Sugar Act and Stamp Act of 1764 to 1765, the Declaratory Act of 1766, the Townshend Acts of 1767 to 1768, the Boston Massacre, 1770, Committees on Correspondence of 1772, Boston Tea Party of 1773, the Intolerable Acts, or Chorus of Acts of 1774, the First Continental Congress of 1774, America's Revolutionary War, which really started out as a Civil War, 1775, and the Lee Resolution, July 2nd, 1776. A lot of people will tell you that it's the Declaration of Independence that is the birth certificate of America. That's wholly and utterly a lie. It tells you right there that they don't understand history, that they've glommed onto what our public school teaches and haven't studied for themselves. The Lee Resolution of July 2nd, 1776 is what made us no longer subjects under the king, but free people. The Declaration of Independence was declaring to a candid world the causes which impel us to the separation. So it was a declaration to the world. It's not what made us free. It's the Lee Resolution, July 2nd, 1776, that made us free. The other thing is the American Revolutionary War. Does anybody know the date for the shot heard around the world? Anybody? April 19th year? 1775, April 19th, 1775. Shot heard around the world. Everybody knows of Paul Revere's famous ride, one if by land, two if by sea. The British were coming to our shores in ships. Even Patrick Henry said they're not, if they're coming in peace, why do they bring armadas to our shores? They're not coming for peaceful resolution. They're coming to subjugate us. He says, I don't know about others, but for me, give me liberty or give me death. That's his famous speech. We're going to cover that as well. But in April 19th of 1775, is that before July 2nd, 1776? Mm-hmm. So the Revolutionary War actually started as a civil war because it was British citizen against British citizen. That's a civil war. Then July 2nd, 1776 is what made it revolutionary. At that point in time, it was a revolutionary war. So those are important things, important concepts to grasp when we start talking about this. So this will be next week. Any questions? Because one of the things you're told in school is the whole reason that we had this ward separated from King George is all about taxation without representation. That's just a little bit of the story, and we're going to go through that. We'll understand what the power structure was, what the politics were at the time, and what was going on. Because when they went to Concord, what did they go to Concord for? Why were the British troops marching on Concord? They were going to take a cache of weapons that who had?
People.
The Sons of Liberty. The Sons of Liberty. They had a cache of weapons. And the king decided all these taxes that he had to put in and take off were making him weak in England. And he remembered what happened to Charles's head when a king becomes weak. And so he knew that it was the guns that the colonists had that kept him from being able to impose a tax and assert his will over the colonies. So the last act was to go take the guns of the colonists. And they said, that's the final straw. That's what started the Civil War that became the Revolutionary War. And we'll learn that when we go through next week's class. So with that, thank you all for coming. Oh yes, thank you. Remember to turn your phasers to kill because we come in peace. And be safe on the way home. Have a great week, and we'll see you next week.